Doctor. Hi, I'm Chris Cirino. I am an internist, and we are. I have a guest here, Dr. Michael Donaldson, and we are in having this event for discussion of how to reverse chronic disease. And Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Michael Donaldson. My background is in chemical engineering. I got into nutrition out of graduate school. So I've been working for the past um, more than 25 years now
All
with
right.
Healthy Acres as a research director. They're taking a deep dive into plant-based nutrition and really looking at reversing chronic disease. People come to us from all over the place looking to how to reverse their issues that they have, different physical issues that they've had. So I've worked in the background on the research area of that
Tell me
and
a
putting
little
together
bit about how you
studies.
got into, tell me a little bit of how you got into being a health coach now.
Sure, health coaching kind of arose from that because I've worked in the background for quite a few years now. And you put that information out there, just throw it out to the masses, and you don't know where the seed landed. And you get a little bit of feedback now and then, but I wanted to really dig in deeper and work with fewer people and get better results with a few in a sense, and really see that transformation in front of me. I know it makes a difference, but you're able to make more individualized, um, not just protocols, but work with the people with what exactly they need to be able to get the success that they're looking for.
Wonderful. Yeah, that does take a grassroots, pardon the pun, initiative, one person at a time. And I was going to ask you, how does, a lot of people that I see in the clinic, when they feel, when they've been diagnosed with a chronic disease like hypertension and diabetes, some of them think that they are basically permanent and with them. So our theme for today is reversing chronic disease. And I wanted, if you could just kind of give me a little bit of an introduction of how diseases are reversible.
Well, we understand some things are reversible. So if you just, cut your hand, you put a band-aid on it, put an ointment on it, and you kind of keep it clean, keep the germs out so it doesn't get infected, and it heals itself. So we understand that self-healing is built into our bodies, and God put it there. We can see it on the outside, we don't see it on the inside as well because it's invisible to us, but it's still there. All we have to do is kind of get out of the way and then supply the right building blocks and the materials that our body needs, and remove whatever barriers are in the way, and healing will happen. Our
Yeah.
body is always working towards that. That's what I've seen, and that's what I try to convey to people.
Well, that's a great analogy, Michael, about a wound, because I think, sometimes what goes on in our system doesn't always feel visible to us. But I think thinking of it as a wound, and we can probably extend that to a chronic disease, is a wound that has the ability to heal.
Sure, just because someone has high blood pressure doesn't mean that they always will have it. It's not normal for blood pressure just to increase as people get older. It's a very common occurrence, but it's not normal. It
Hmm.
should still say 110 over 60 your whole life. There's no reason to change that.
Right. And I know I sometimes with, modern medicine and developing pills to treat diseases, we, we may be missing the most important part of it is that our body in a state of disease is not in a fixed state. There's still some flexibility in that.
Yes, it's not that's the first thing people have to understand, that this isn't a death sentence or a chronic disease. If you don't change, you'll keep on getting what you already have. But if you change your inputs, you'll get your different outputs.
Great, great.
So you're not stuck.
Yeah. So how that sounds very daunting for someone when they get diagnosed with diabetes, where do they begin? Is this something that can be manageable? This reversing a disease, is this something that can be manageable for anyone getting diagnosed, or is it just someone who, is diagnosed at an early stage and it's easier?
The research shows that, if it's been less than 5 years since diagnosis of diabetes, it usually reverses quite well. And sometimes if it's been longer, people still are able to reverse it completely. If it doesn't reverse completely, still you get good benefits and you have less complications if you get closer to perfect blood control as far as sugar control. It may not be perfect reversal, but you can certainly improve your health a long ways.
Okay, great. And that's really good news for everyone who's whatever stage they're at. There is hope. I think you brought up a really interesting comment about inputs and outputs. And, it a lot of times in the clinic, as I'm also working with patients with chronic diseases, they say, well, doctor, I don't I eat very healthy and I don't see why this is happening. And, or they are also on the stage where they're like, well, I've been working on this. I'm working on it now. And 2, 3 years later goes and they haven't had a change in their health. They have their weight is the same. They still have the burden of chronic disease. What do you think might be going on in those cases?
Well, that's certainly part of that, but you could look at 5 pillars of health, from functional medicine. You have diet, but you also have exercise, you have sleep, you also have dealing with stress and toxins as well. I mean, those 5 things there, you have to look at all those things and make a step at a time. I
Yeah,
found usually at least it's in my case, maybe in your case too, we know a lot more than we actually do. We know what's the next most important thing to do. And if you think about it for a minute, you'd probably come up with what I could do right now to optimize my health. Of those 5 areas, there's probably something that's not optimized. I mean,
yeah. And
not all of us are Brian Johnson, so we're not all optimized necessarily. So there's room for improvement in everybody. So I eat well, but maybe I sleep horribly,
right.
or I stress over things too much. I mean, there's different aspects of that really to achieve wellness.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point is that, there is a responsibility for each person to kind of do a little brainstorming about, what are the um, things that we are consciously doing that can be changed, and then maybe putting some of those unconscious things that we are just rotely doing. Like there's always it's very interesting. I'll have a patient tell me that, who's trying to quit smoking is like, doctor, I can't imagine how this happens, but I have a pack of cigarettes in my hand. The next thing I'm halfway through a cigarette. And so this idea of, what are those steps?
Hmm.
And a lot of times we basically X out the things that we think we're doing when we're actually Xing out the things that can actually, when we put attention to, can actually make a huge difference.
So that's a neat thing about health coaching in that being able to see we're not always self-aware of the things we're doing. Like
Right.
you mentioned there, I started the pack of cigarette, now I'm halfway, I'm already puffing on it, and I don't know what happened in between there.
Right.
Excuse me there.
Yeah.
But that self-awareness really helps. And just talking to a health coach, sometimes the insights don't come from the coach necessarily. That's the magic of coaching. The insights often come from the client themselves, and they get that aha moment, and they
Yeah.
realize, oh, that's the connection.
Mhm. So that, yeah, and that certainly, yeah, brings me to that state of just saying, health in many ways, health is an awareness, a self-awareness condition, whereas disease may be more of, we could even go as far as to say a disease may be an unconscious state in some ways, because ultimately some of the things that we're doing that we're not aware of are are filling us in that case with a state of dis-ease. We often see challenges in patients who are using drugs, and we might as well say it. Sugar is a drug, right? And the dose is the poison. And I'm speaking specifically of refined sugar, processed foods, as opposed to what is found in nature. And sometimes we don't, we know that there's some things, yet it continues to take us to those foods. And I wonder if there is some, in a way, self-medicating going on, that the food itself makes a person feel more at a state of calm. It may be more soothing for a moment, only to cause disease later on.
So yeah, the self-awareness and you're using things that you're not you're not sure of why or the effect that they have on your body.
Right,
Life is complicated, right? I mean, there's work, there's kids, there's career things, there's stresses from all kinds of places, and not all of us can just like really focus on our health necessarily.
right,
You're working on building a practice, or you're working at, you know, other aspects of your life,
right,
and health just kind of goes on autopilot. And your diet, you just eat what you've always eaten, and you don't really think about it too much.
right. So it sounds like, just from the first step of things, one of the things that you do as a health coach, and I think that's also very important for clinicians, for others in the healthcare field to consider, is really, kind of shining the light, being available for patients to kind of troubleshoot and shine the light of awareness. And so that sounds like that's one of your first step, is talking about how things can get under and creating a greater self-awareness.
Yeah, greater self-awareness and realizing that there is, right, we talked before that there is a problem and you're not stuck with it.
Right,
First of all, okay, the doctor may tell you, well, you have to take this medication for the rest of your life. You're on insulin, and that's just the way it is. And then you'll start, we have to check your eyes to make sure you don't get glaucoma. We check your fingers, your toes, make sure circulation is good because you don't want to start losing appendages and you think it's just a downhill path
right,
because
right.
that's all the medical system has. They manage disease, but they don't reverse it.
Right, right. Yeah, I think there's a great, I think there really is a great need in the medical care of patients to sort of open up more of what, rather than sick care, this sort of health care, healing care. And I think definitely, if the medical system, as it is acting now, there's a good reason why there are a lot of other people that are getting involved, including health coaches, because it turns out that sometimes um, it doesn't take a doctor, sometimes it doesn't take a physician assistant to shine a light on someone, or just to be there and coach them through what it's like to heal, because it doesn't take medications most of the times, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's you've worked in a busy practice. You know kind of what it means to go from patient to patient. You've experienced the other side, the doctor side, and a lot of people have experienced the other side, being a patient. And there
Right.
just isn't time. There isn't time to really sit down and talk. With a health coach, you can sit down for 45 minutes
It's
and you get to talk. Someone maybe for the first time really gets to hear you and understand your point of view and really listen to you. So it's health coaching is different. It's very client centered, client directed. There's guidance there in asking the right questions. But you as the client get to direct what's really important, what am I struggling with, and how to get free from the disease. So
great. Great.
it's a good marriage between doctors and allied professionals along there.
Right.
Because the health coach has the time to sit down and talk. That's what you're paying for, is the time there. Not
Yeah.
just expertise in diagnosing. Okay, I know exactly what's wrong, and this medication will help. And if you're taking these other medications, I know which ones to prescribe so I don't get side effects or counteracting effects. I mean, there's an expertise in that, but that alone is not enough. We
Right.
have to give credit to the doctors where they're trying hard, but the system they're in is just not designed to reverse chronic disease. It was designed to handle acute conditions and emergencies and sewing people back and putting them back together and things like that. But reversing chronic disease has more to do with what we mentioned, the diet, lifestyle, physical activity, sleep, stress, and toxins. And the
Absolutely.
current medical system is not optimized to deal with those things.
Right, right. And that reminds me of a wonderful quote Thomas Edison said about the doctor of the future will give no medication, but will interest his patients in the care of the human frame, diet, and the cause and prevention of disease. And it's, I think
Love
we
that quote.
right, me too. And I think we're taking a real full circle. There used to be a very strong influence on physical model or a biomedical model of disease. And now we're adding all of these elements, that starting and some of these go way back into, the times of the Greek philosophers, about incorporating all of these other things that affect us. In fact, in some ways, I like to think of healing as a recalibrating of our self-love to ourselves. In many ways, it's about recalibrating our relationship with our environment. Now, you mentioned this and as an inputs-outputs thing, and I think that's a great way to look at it too. And sometimes the inputs are the very inputs that are happening within our body as we are holding thoughts, as we are holding upon stress. And many diseases now have been associated with maybe three major conditions, chronic disease-wise, is sedentary state, stress, and the consumption of alcohol and cigarettes. But I think it gives us a real awakening that, disease is in the hands of the person. And I think that where that is power.
Now, Chris, you mentioned a little bit on the inputs, and you kind of including stress. And I think you're kind of alluding to that a little bit because we build up stress in ourselves when we don't process those inputs well. Not
Right.
just thoughts about ourselves as well, right?
Right. Yeah, I like to call it three environments. And I think those, to me, those kind of also summarize what the inputs are: the environment we live in, the environment we take in, and the environment we imagine. And what I mean by the environment we live in, I mean not only the physical space that is around us, but also the community in which we live and the buffer of the community with the basically the area of nature. And so in a way, we are always in interaction with nature. And I think in many ways we build these cities and our homes to protect us from the what's going on outside of us. So many diseases can be prevented in that case, but I also think about the importance of our community. And some of the studies going back, there's a Harvard cohort study. One of the strongest influences on a person's health is their community, particularly whether they have close friends. And it doesn't mean a lot, but a few that they can really count on for some of what you were saying about processing our stress. Yes, we can process our stress independently, but we also can process it interdependently. And this idea that we are not alone. So that's the environment that is outside of us,
Okay.
the environment we live in. And the environment we take in is the food, the toxins, the other substances in nature that influence us. So obviously an example of disease would be getting pneumonia from tuberculosis. You're breathing in that particle. But a lot of other factors include, exposure to environmental toxins, whether that's in what we ingest or inspire. And so that is where a lot of times we spend about don't eat this, eat that type of a mentality. But I think, which I'll get into another way of thinking about that. And then finally, the environment we imagine. And the imagination is not only conscious, but unconscious. And in many ways, our body is there to protect us. And we have a beautiful defense system that is capable of quickly determining when something is a threat. And it's the very skill that creates pattern recognition, and it's also the what it leads to bias. Bias is not always a bad thing in as much as it's a quick judgment on something, and then we have to wait and rule, kind of put in our wisdom, our time test, and ask that question: Is this really what I'm perceiving? Because a lot of times, what is perceived is experienced as reality. You could imagine, having a dream where you're falling and
Right.
your body is biochemically going through the same result of what it would imagine falling to be. And so our
Yeah, that's
imagination is,
fascinating.
yeah,
That what you experience is sometimes just what you imagine. That whole
right.
stress response can be to something imaginary, but your body doesn't know the difference.
And in that is how our body and our brain weaves the story of our life. And you can think of a pearl that's developed when a grain of sand, a speck of sand comes in an oyster, and that oyster is secreting the same substance that it uses for its shell, its mantle to form, around that substance, that whatever that speck is. And essentially it forms a pearl. Now, in a way, it's not as fixed as this, but it can be. In a way, that is essentially what happens as we weave our events. Once something happens, then the story starts to become more fixed, become essentially our life then becomes a manifestation of what not what our greatest traumas led us to. And so in many ways, I can sit with someone who has diabetes 5 minutes in, not even sometimes, they're talking about their grief and their pain that they're going through. And so I think one way of looking at it is that there is an unconscious story that we tell ourselves. And there is also the other side of our nervous system, which is our creative side, which uses both, kind of our reactive state and also our imagination. So imagination is also conscious. And you can ask someone to draw something. And sometimes people who have, and this is more clinical rather than evidence-based, but I do wonder about this, is sometimes you wonder, some people who are dealing with a lot of shame, they often have been held back in their ability to create. So, go ahead and draw something. There's no mistakes. There might be a little squiggle or something. There's a concern about perfectionism. And I do believe that in many ways, the same manner at which we take up a pen and start writing our story, or pick up a paintbrush and start painting, so too does thinking ourselves out, or imagining ourselves out of our chronic disease state can be. And in a way, by creating, we are reformatting that kind of reflex story. Now we carry it with us, but it becomes less and less alerted. Um, so that's kind of a way that I sometimes see the internal aspect.
Okay. Yeah, that with health coaching, some of what we do in the beginning is really getting a long-term picture. Like what does a healthy Karen look like?
Yeah,
Or what does a healthy Mike look like? Tell me that. Describe that in your own words to me.
right,
And then they start to create a new imagination. Okay, what would life be like?
right,
And you start to dream about that and think about that and put that in front of you, and you start to move towards that because that's what you're focusing on.
right.
You put your energy that way instead of instead of the negative thoughts, you put into the positive thoughts. You focus on that, and then your body starts finding ways to line up with that vision.
Right. And that's a great example of if it fires, it wires. The more we think of the reflexive and negative thoughts, the more easily they are triggered, and more easily, in that case, our perception
Hmm.
guides our reality. So if we have that perception of being in a victim state, our perception guides that reality. And a lot of things Carl Jung had written about this idea that in many ways we are led to repeating the same trauma over and over again until we can heal that. I think of one example as well is when someone has a stroke. They may have function, they may have lost sensation or even recognition that this is part of their body. Let's say they have a stroke and in the mapping, they've lost recognition that their hand is part of their body. They will essentially um, paint their other nails with the hand, for instance. But sometimes that hand will go into neglect, even though it's still functioning. And I think that's an interesting way of thinking of it. Sometimes we we sort of map around what we think we're capable of doing, but all the while our power is even greater, and so I think it sounds like, coming full circle with your health, with the whole principle of health coaching is it's really in a state of empowerment, and sort of giving a person permission to imagine, what would it be like to to be healthy and to be able to be freely mobile and not feel the pain again and again and again.
Yeah, so th those fears of what the future could look like change. Instead of fearing the future, you're looking forward to it. Yeah, what would it be like? And then I don't have to fear the complications of diabetes. I can be free. I don't have to worry about my next doctor visit. It's freedom. It's like, yeah, my blood sugar's fine. My weight has normalized, and the internal things physically that are wrong have been corrected. And it's freedom, and the future looks great rather than grim for someone.
Yeah. And psychology also talks about this idea of internal locus of control and external locus of control. And
Mhm.
the external locus of control is that someone is dependent on an external, in this case, a person or something to validate their pathway, whereas an internal locus of control is where that person is self-dependent in moving towards their goals. And I think in some ways there's when there's a huge trauma, and that trauma can be in the form of multiple traumas. It can be in the form of a very large trauma in the beginning. And that trauma is not just physical, right? It's psychic, it's psychological trauma, it's neglect, which I think is a really um, unacknowledged trauma in many people's lives. But when those traumas occur, what essentially is happening is an a almost like a codependence of what the external is, because their reaction is really based on a perceived action, and essentially they're waiting for it. The brain is honed in on that. And I think when we talk about healing, essentially we're talking about an inside job in many ways. Um, but an inside job that is not without its community. And I think, there was a great example of trauma and how trauma itself is not always leading to a pathway where we only are
Mhm.
so dependent on externalities. And those externalities could be validation, those externalities could be food, it could be drugs, it could be smoking, it could be, exercise, pornography in excess. And I think it was there was a story that Jane Goodall recently passed away, wrote in her book called The Book of Hope, I believe, where she talked about this child in an African village who threw a stone at another child, and that child got hurt, and everyone dropped everything to attend to that child. And that would be our normal response, but not in this village. Everyone also, and there were many other people that came to attend to the child who threw that stone as well. And I think that is where we ultimately can process. We are a group species. We are social beings. And yes, we have our independence. Yes, we have our ability to be autonomous. We also have that ability to interact and to share compassionately, right? Suffer together. That is the essence of compassion. And so here we are.
Sure. Well, there's something interesting that in that too. You talk about community being
Yeah.
really important to healing. And I read this study within the last couple of years, looking at the people around someone. Like if your friends are overweight, you're more likely to be overweight. If your friends are sedentary, the people hang out with are sedentary, you have a much higher chance of being sedentary. If you hang out with really active people, they're always doing stuff and they're outside and they're involved in community and they're doing things. They're not sitting around and scanning the phone. They're doing stuff and you're more likely to be like that too. So pick your friends carefully. Now, what happens if you're stuck with, my friends, my family, they're not active people. What do you tell people about that in terms of community? How do you help them?
Well, I would basically encourage them to be the change that they wish to see, in a way they can um, announce to those family and friends that they're on a journey to healing in whatever form they want to bring it up, and that they may be seeing different things in the near future, and also just really getting them involved in different ways, and sometimes you'll see a chain reaction occur, and it's a beautiful thing. uh,
Hmm.
I like to start with this idea, and it's a very important idea. I remember events that have literally happened that only lasted about 30 minutes to an hour, maybe even a smile. And that was only a few seconds, right? And so what I want to share with you is this idea of like meaningful moments in time, and other people have referred to it as glimmers. And the idea
Okay.
here is that the meeting of two people, I think, is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful opportunity to offer and to create a space for some very magical things to happen, which is to be heard and to be there's something that we feel, right? Every human being feels when the other person is listening to us. They're not just waiting to answer their next, place, but it's this feeling like, and so we can create an environment, in a sense, we can create an environment for others to feel that harmony. And there, in some ways, it can, some people can feel taken aback by that because they're not used to it. But it also it gives a space for them to process, to feel comfortable, to explain their feelings. But the point here is that every moment in time, we can build these new memories, right? And in order to heal from chronic diseases, we need to build new memories. By building these new memories, it causes a change. It causes friction to occur in those old memories that no longer makes them as substantive as in the past. It's kind of like having a really bad relationship and then having a new relationship and really building through it, and what it feels like to look back and say, oh, I see now. That was, that was an interaction, and there were some things I needed to heal by.
So you're talking about making new connections then,
Right, making new
new
connections.
associations with your environment around you, with the people around you, and says, I'm going to change. I'm going to become a different person here
Right.
because I realize I'm not stuck. And they take that locus of control that they thought was external and they bring it into themselves. Is, I can change. And I want all of you around me to recognize that I'm going to change and invite you to change with me.
Oh my gosh.
But
Yeah.
I'm going to change anyways. And I hope you come along and you'll see the results. And that's the health coach also can be a part of that community. They kind of step in, but
Right.
the health coach is going to step back out too. It's a very temporary thing.
Right.
So a good health coach just says, who else in your circle can help support you, is there for you that you can talk to, help you be accountable to, so that your results aren't just during this 4 months or the 6 months that we work together, but they're permanent and they stick.
Right.
Because you said that social environment around us is so critical to make
Right.
it work for a long term. And
Ex-
that's they brought up in this areas of the world called the blue zones, where people are healthier, but they're not intentionally healthier. It's the environment built around them, chosen around them, that the healthy choices are just automatic. They don't have to think about them.
That's
We get to
good.
that point that would be awesome for all of us. That the healthy choices are the obvious ones, the easiest ones. They're
Right.
not right now. So it does take someone taking that locus of control and says, I'm going to internalize that and I'm going to change myself and my environment around me. I'm going to make better choices.
Right. Yeah, that is so poignant. It's so um, mm, important and crucial to understand that part of the change takes one through a journey of discomfort because they have to hold in that space of change
Hmm.
and out of that what their body originally would determine as comfortable. And in some ways, that comfortable is no longer working, right? It's sort of like this idea
Yeah.
where if you find a very high peak and a very low down, you get a nice mean, right? But finding yourself in that midpoint is something that takes a dynamic change. It takes holding yourself a little bit more in that space of discomfort. It takes knowing that your body has the power not only to withstand that pain, but also heal. And so there is
Mhm.
a hope to it, there's a faith, there's a courage, right, to it. And in some ways, I like to visualize it as a fire, a ring of fire that we go through, that here we are, we're going through it. And then on the other side is our new self and also our community that is
Hmm.
for us.
And you're not going to stay in the fire forever. You're going through it,
Right.
and there's a better you on the other side.
Right.
But in the midst of it, it feels like a bit of fire.
Oh yeah. And we have a lot of good examples to what that might feel like. Some people, again, a lot of this can be related to neurotransmitters that have adapted. There's some studies supporting dopamine insensitivity or reduction in dopamine neurotransmitters, along with other neurotransmitters that get sort of tweaked or warped because of the disease behavioral state. And once we go through that, essentially we're depending more on our body. It's almost like you were giving yourself testosterone for maybe a couple months or so, and then all of a sudden, because our body will stop producing testosterone because it's receiving it. And then all of a sudden you cut that off. There's going to be
Oh,
a period
yeah.
of time, right, where we have to regenerate and be able to produce that on our own. And that's essentially what's happening, where we retweak our system. There have been studies looking at how the brain patterns, including with food addiction, have very similar brain patterns where the putamen and the amygdala are both highly active. And those are the same parts where we have the fight and flight response. It is the same part where we have pain and pleasure. So yes, fight and flight and pain and pleasure are uniquely intertwined. And so when people go through this adaptation, they're going to feel very bored. They're going to have the thoughts of whatever the behavior they're changing on their mind, and they're going to want to do anything else but do
Mm-hmm.
the change. But what we do is we create new patterns, right? And when we're creating new patterns, we're wiring new circuitry. Maybe some of the circuitry hasn't ever been wired for a while before, or even ever,
Right.
right? And so now we have to imagine out, right? Someone who loses their vision, who has increased circuitry to their auditory senses, so they become more keen at their sense of hearing. So too, when we go through a healing, we need to we start to rewire, and that's not going to feel comfortable initially.
Sure. And I remember when first changing my diet, and it was uncomfortable. I thought, well, I'm just thinking about food all the time. I'm planning out meals and what to eat next, and it doesn't stay that way. There's
Right,
an adaptation, and then it becomes more normal, and you have a different pattern of eating, a different lifestyle,
right,
and you keep going across those same circuits, and you form new networks of nerves firing together. And the dopamine response comes differently than it did before. You get away from addictions, and it's more of a steady state
right,
rather than just a hyper addicted state.
right. And meanwhile, other neurotransmitters can be activated in the setting of healing, especially amongst a community. Some of the feel-good hormones like oxytocin, vasopressin, and the endogenous opioid system can be actually increased in the setting of being with people, and especially people we identify as our group, right? Our tribe,
Hmm.
sense of belonging. Now, oxytocin, interestingly enough, has the other side of it, which is basically cues for fighting and defending, against harm to the people we love. So it's kind of an interesting idea. But when we're together in group, it can help us to build a bridge while our body's still healing. And that's why I think these social groups work so well. I think it was Malcolm X who said, you know, um, when I becomes we, even illness can become wellness.
So when I becomes we, even illness becomes wellness.
Yes,
So it's what you're saying then is that healing and recovering from sickness and disease is easier in community.
right. Yeah, and that I think that's probably a good uh, point soon to start concluding, but I think that in of itself is a talk on itself. It's interesting that some studies have looked at zip codes and area even housing that's aligning with or adjacent to other zip codes, and there are mass differences in those areas, and so you think about what is going on there, and there's infrastructural differences, there's community centers like parks, there's more green space, there's less pollution. And so I think if we look at health as being not a fault to an individual, but a responsibility, not only for the individual, but in a sense for our community and a greater model,
Hmm.
then we
Yeah,
can
think
really
bigger.
start, yeah, we can start to realize here, now we've got social justice. We've got this idea of 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 helping out, other communities that are having these challenges. Why do people in one zip code get more cases of breast cancer than people in other zip codes? Or how about chronic disease in the Southeast United States, which is one of the highest rates of chronic disease in the country? And so now we start to say, hey, what is disease really? So it's not, it becomes more of a responsibility. And it's not a responsibility like your parents telling you, oh, you got to do this, you got to clean your room, but it's just kind of this really amazing power that we have as human beings.
So that's the whole if you start with the individual, there are changes that each person can make and says, so I can control what I put into my mouth. There's
Right.
some determinants of health that are outside of me in the circle of community around me that I cannot change.
Right.
And that
Yeah,
we as a community are responsible for. I can do the changes inside me, and often that is enough to move yourself a long way.
it is. It is.
But with the community all around you, now that sticks really well, and you have a healthy community, which builds out to a healthy society.
Right. I think that Maslow's hierarchy of needs really come into effect really well in this. I just met a patient the last week who, has uncontrolled diabetes and is using meth and has been abused in the past and is homeless and is living out of their car. And you could imagine trying to control, trying to be there to help in controlling a condition when there is no foundation. There's no foundation of those basic needs of protection and safety and security.
Yeah.
So, at that point, any doctor, as much as they may want to blind themselves to try, any doctor realizes that nothing is going to get better until we get the first part addressed, which is a safe living setting.
Hmm.
So yeah, it does become incumbent on us, in more of a social responsibility that our health is not just an individual a responsibility, but an inter responsibility, and that we all can help. And going back to coaching, it seems to be what you've been called to do in this chapter of your life. Um, Maybe in summary, what kind of things would you like to tell your future clients about what it's like to meet with you the first time, and how does it look like? What is coaching going to look like?
The first time we meet, I really get to talk to you and listen to you and see what your health conditions are, what your life is like, and really hear what your issues are that you're struggling with. And I would tell you a little bit about what it could look like and see, am I able to help you with what you're struggling with? And it could be I'm the wrong fit. I mean, that's possible that it's not, you know, I'm not the right person that helps you with your deepest need. If you need housing, I'm not the person to help you with. But if you need help with actually reversing diabetes, then we could probably work together. And so we talk about that, what your needs are, what I can offer in terms of working together, and to see if it's a fit, see if it's a good partnership that would help you get what you're looking for in terms of moving forward with your health. So it's the first talk is really a health coaching session. It doesn't cost you anything to come and talk, and we'll just see if it's a good fit. Some people work better with certain kinds of people too. So it's kind of a personality match too. To
That's
see if
true.
you need a health coach, but you don't need me as a health coach, or maybe we hit it off really well, and says, well, this is going to work great, and he's got the kind of tips and motivation and insights that I'm looking for, that resonate with who I am.
Great, great. So it sounds like that first part is more of a kind of get to know the kind of the flow, the energy, if this is a good match, and maybe give them a little time to sort of envision what their goals are with you. And maybe some people I've seen, they have actually a hard time saying what their goals are. They can't imagine that they're even worthy of meeting their goals. That they're doomed to, live with this chronic disease like their mother did, like their sister did for the rest of their life. So yeah, it's kind of that first meet and greet.
Right. But there's hope there. It can be different. Your future does not have to look like a dismal future that you've seen around you.
Right.
Because the evidence is there. It's the mechanisms for how to do this are already worked out. It's not a mystery. It's not really confusion. I can help you get clarity on that.
Right.
but you have to want to change, be willing to embrace that positive future in front of you,
Right.
and break free of whatever's holding you back too. And there's probably mindset issues, there may be emotional issues, there may
Right.
be abuse issues to work through as to why you're there in the first place.
Right.
And I
Right.
can help you with some of those things. I'm not a counselor. We look forward in coaching more than back at just, how can I resolve past hurts? That's
Right.
not my specialty there. There's a need for that, but that's not, I'm not a counselor.
Yeah.
I'm a coach. So we're looking at goals and behavior transformation.
Right. I was going to say
Spread that. That's what
that's a
we
hot
do.
word is transformation. That's a beautiful word because every cell in our body is going through that transformation. We're carrying every part of ourselves, even this
Hmm.
part that has self-doubt. And I like to, some of the things that happen with shame come out a lot, and we can talk about that another time, but it's this idea that sometimes we self-sabotage. There's a part of us that wants to just stay the same. There's a part of us that wants to be angry. And what I like to visualize is just putting your arms around that part and not asking it to change, but sort of come along with me on this journey, and let's see what happens, and I think that's a very hard thing because a lot of times people who feel that then start feeling shame about why they should be feeling that, and it starts becoming a cycle, and inside there is a sort of judgment instinct, right? And so with healing, we surrender our judgment. We let go of that. We open ourselves up to what does it look like to care for ourselves? Really, we don't get born with a care manual, right? So we get to make our path, right? I can't give you a prescription and say, do this, do that, do that. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Of course, anytime we say don't, it means we want to do it. And so we want to work with the do's and the don'ts inside and embrace both of them. So it sounds like you've got a great practice. Michael, I hope things continue to grow in your practice in reaching out and in connecting with people that really will benefit from your coaching service. I'd like if you can leave some links, and when I post this video, we'll have all our links shared. But I look forward to having another discussion with you on perhaps maybe the environment and how it's associated or the other concepts. I really appreciate this time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
you can read more at enddiabetesnow.co. And that's where you find more information about the health coaching and lots of practical tips there as well, just in the blog section, things you can do right now to make a difference in your health.
Wonderful, Michael. And for others that are listening, we'll get those websites and that information put up. If you want to get more information from me, I have a website called Your Health Forum, which has about 300 articles on behavioral change in various topics in the medical field and also in the psychological field. And then also, I had a recent book that I published called Journey to Wellness, Unlocking the 9 Laws of Natural Healing, which also talk about some of these concepts. So thank you so much for your attention. And thank you again,
Yeah,
Michael.
great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thank you all for listening in. Hope this is helpful to you all.
Okay, take care.